So thank you so much for joining me today on Muscle Insights. That's actually the very first time I've used that name. I don't know. I think that's what we're going with, but I've got scientific snitch, Ella. I'm just gonna call you Ella. Like you said, it's a little easier. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on.
What do you think about that name? Is that lame or does that sound decent for my podcast kind of
I
stuff I
think it's
do?
a pretty good podcast name. I mean, I haven't been on many podcasts, so I can't be one to judge.
Cool. So you just graduated. Thank you so much for coming on after this. I know you got a lot of stuff going on with your family. Congratulations. You just graduated from Michigan with your undergraduate, right?
Yes, I just graduated with my undergrad in applied exercise science. It's a bachelor's of science degree, so it's a little bit, I guess, more adorned than an applied exercise science degree normally would be, but that's just University of Michigan style.
And I know you were pretty like nervous, anxious, waiting to hear where you were going to do your postgraduate stuff. Did you find that out?
Yes, so I unfortunately did not get into the PhD program that I applied for in that round. I'm still waiting on the other responses. I am, however, going to be applying towards master's degrees programs as my backup. So that's the whole entire spiel of things.
Where are you looking at?
University of Michigan, University of Iowa, MD Anderson, UT Houston, San Antonio. That's also the same place where that DeFranco study, I made a post about it on Instagram. What else? Oh yeah, Emory. I know a few professors there who are really fantastic. And Vanderbilt.
Nice. Was that okay? Were you bummed, or I mean, how did you deal with that? Was that something you were pretty looking forward to? Did you think like what was your expectations?
I did not think I was going to get in. So how it is usually right now is there's PhD programs are extremely competitive. So it's like the people who knew what they wanted to do since they were like 2 years old, straight out of undergrad with like 12 different publications. It's really highly competitive. So it's like the cream of the crop rise to the top. And I figured out what I wanted to do pretty late in the game. I had a few tragedies throughout my time in college. So I had a few people dying on me.
Oh
And
no.
it was a little difficult for me to find my path. Once I did find my path, I got a decent, like, I have a decent track record after the passing of my loved ones. That sounds really dark, but that's the idea. So it's like I don't have as much experience as maybe somebody who knew what they wanted to do since they were fresh out of high school would. So it's just everybody's their own individual.
These are all people that just have their bachelor's applying for the PhD, the one that you went into, or can they apply after you get your master's? How does that all work? I'm not real sure.
Yeah, so at least in America, you can apply either directly after undergrad or after master's. Both are like an equal sort of chance depending. A lot of people with master's degrees are typically favored just because they're more qualified. However, if you are exceptional as an undergrad student, then you are able to get in. Clearly I'm kind of like shooting in the dark here because like I'm by no means an exceptional human being. I just
Oh.
in my personal opinion, I just am very passionate and I am very driven towards what I want to do. So, for example, over the past year, I've been juggling two laboratory experiences, which is not really heard of among a lot of undergrads who are also taking classes. So, I was working in one lab, I was volunteering in another, and I was also taking classes, which was a heck of a lot of work, but
While
I
building all this other stuff you got going on too.
yeah, so it can get pretty pretty hectic, but I like keeping myself busy.
So yeah, I was curious. So what did you go to school like originally? What was your thought process? Like what were you going to go for?
So I started off as a biology major and I actually almost made it to the end of my degree, but I decided to change halfway because of that tragedy I was just talking about. One of my loved ones died from pancreatic cancer associated cachexia, which is basically muscle wasting that is associated with cancer.
I had a good friend die from pancreatic cancer as well. That's a brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really brutal. And typically, a lot of pancreatic cancer patients do suffer really greatly from muscle wasting, which it can be
Yeah.
really hard to watch that. So it was
Yeah.
rough, and I lost my way in that sort of sense, where it was like during the time I was just like focusing on like fitness. I was focusing on my mental health and trying to get myself to focus on things. And then on top of that, there was the pandemic going on. So I wasn't really able to focus fully on schoolwork because it was all virtual. So it's like all of those things combined, regardless, I don't give myself any excuses. I basically quit out of that. But I thought that fitness would be where I wanted to go. When I got into the applied exercise science degree, I realized very quickly that I hate corporate fitness and that I
And
really
what exactly do you mean by corporate fitness?
like owning a gym, like
Yeah.
being a personal trainer, like very, very heavily personal trainer. I'm fine with coaching. It's mainly like the being like the personal trainer walking the floor and stuff like that. I've tried it before, it's not my thing.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I was in the corporate gym world for a long time. That's kind of where I started training and then managing and directing of all that in it. Yeah, it blows. It's way better just to be totally in control of your own destiny and not dependent on other people or building someone else's dream. So you decided to switch to the applied, what is it again? Applied.
So it's a bachelor's of science in applied exercise science, kind of a
And so,
weird name, but it's a clinical, there's two tracks, there's clinical and management. I chose clinical.
okay. And then are you doing a lot of kinesiology in there too? You have a lot of like biomechanics class and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why it's so there's three different types of kinesiology degrees here at UMich. There's movement science, which I wish I took. There's also applied exercise science, the clinical and management track, and then there's also sports management. Sports management is more so along the lines of that corporate fitness thing that I was talking about. I'm the applied exercise science degree is like a mixture of the two. I'm gonna be real with you. I prefer all of the physiology classes, all of the biology classes I took, on top of my coursework. So just to put it into perspective, I finished the degree that I got. Like I had to start basically from scratch. And I finished a degree that should take around 4 years, or you should be able to take it in 4 years. And I ended up finishing it in 2 years. So for like three of those semesters, I was taking like 17,
That's
16,
so
17.
funny because I was trying to do the math in my head. I'm like, wow, like
Yeah.
what are you doing then? If you went through that much, I was wondering if there was a lot of crossover in credits or not.
Oh, there was like no crossover. Like I think only like three of the prerequisites were
Mhm.
crossed over. So I basically had to do everything over again.
So how did you
Um,
like, what was like the change in the mindset that led to that kind of refocused energy?
so I refocused back right into STEM, mainly after taking this one intro to biology class. It was an intro to molecular and developmental cellular, introduction to molecular, cellular, and developmental biology, MCDB.
Sounds so fun.
Uh, oh my God, I fell in love with it because they started off by teaching a lot about like DNA replication. Then they got into like cancer, they got into the function of different organs, and by the end of it, I just fell in love with everything that had to do with biology. Um, I immediately decided to take genetics and all these other classes right after, but I realized that if I were to try to finish my degree in 2 years, there was like almost no way I would be able to like switch over to movement science, which freaking sucked. So I stuck with applied exercise science to finish the degree, but I grind it out in the research part of things. On the research side of things, I work in one lab. It's a cardiology lab. I love it so much. It's so fun. So basically, I work with mice and rabbits, and I do a lot of work on the heart, learning about arrhythmias. And then in another lab, I was learning about insulin resistance and skeletal muscle bioenergetics. That was the lab that I was volunteering in. Both labs I hold very dear to my heart. And then prior to that, I also had another laboratory experience that was mainly in mice, learning about the melanocortin circuits in the brain and its control over metabolism.
So you prefer to actually be there doing it. You don't want to like go through all the studies and do all the research. Like I thought that was your thing was sorting through tons and tons of studies and just being buried in it.
Oh, I love reading through studies. However, being under a cell culture hood is where I want to be. And that's why I decided to apply for a PhD, even though I knew I probably wouldn't get in. It's just something that I love so much, and it's what I want to do. So,
What do you think like the end game is? What do you see as far as at the end of your educational career and as far as your actual professional career?
I'm thinking either working in industry at some point, like having just like a 9 to 5 in the laboratory sort of job, But then on top of that, I would also still be managing my social media, which I've been doing perfectly fine with 30 other billion things on my plate.
Right?
So I'm sure I'd be able to manage it with a 9 to 5.
Do you get any chill time, or when does it start? When does your master's, or when would whatever you're doing next start?
It would start around September of next year. So I am
Okay,
taking a bit of a break.
nice. Nice. Well, you definitely have earned it after just zooming through that. Did you get to actually like have fun? I mean, you're at Michigan, right? That's like a huge, huge college. Did you do like keg stands, or did you just like nerd it up the whole time?
Oh no, I just nerded up the whole time.
You
So
went to some
this was
games at the big house, right?
no, I never even went to the Chrysler Center until graduation.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
my favorite thing to do is just kind of to look at cells underneath a microscope. That's like my that's
Uh,
my
uh,
that's my thing.
well, that then you're definitely doing the right thing. Did you get to work with much cadavers yet, or is that something you'll be doing more in like masters and PhD programs?
That's probably what I'll be doing more in my master's and PhD, especially if I decide to go into physiology, which is what I really want to do. I've been applying to a lot of molecular integrative physiology programs, health and human physiology, stuff like that. Just saying those names probably would have sparked a chord with a few people who are probably listening, like University of Iowa, health and human physiology, stuff like that. Anywho. Yeah, so probably working with cadavers, but in the University of Michigan, you do work with plastinated models during your undergraduate kinesiology program. So that's kind of cool. You get to see
Yeah.
like muscles and stuff.
Yeah, well, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll probably be like a lab aide. You'll be the one like cutting the brains open and stuff. You'll be cutting their heads open.
Working with animals, you definitely do see all of that. So,
You would be totally good with that, right? You have that kind
oh yeah.
of yeah.
I work with I do rabbit surgeries and mouse surgeries. I don't want to go into too gory detail, but like it can get pretty gory. So it's good to keep that in mind whenever you're like working in a lab.
So what about your own like fitness? How have you been able to handle that while everything's been so busy? I'm assuming this next little break, you're going to really kind of focus on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I am probably going to be focusing really hard because I've had 3 surgeries over the past year and a half.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. I
I've
saw the
now,
one.
yeah, I had 2 bunionectomies as well. So those were 2 really big ones because it basically broke my foot. Then I had the rib surgery, so now I've just been like recovering from that. But once I do recover, I want to try to go for a bodybuilding show.
Oh, nice.
Um,
What would you compete in? Like what would the division be?
I don't really know yet. I'm just gonna
Oh,
think
you'd be
about,
like natty, right? You're not enhanced at all, right? So you'd probably
yeah,
be like
no,
a
I'm
natty
not.
organization.
Yeah, it would probably be natty.
Yeah.
But like regardless, like I don't know what I would go for. I think it would just depend on what I look like. Based off of my frame, I feel like I would do better in not bikini because I don't have that frame, unfortunately. But I do.
What is your frame? I see you in the sweaters. I know there's somewhere you're not in as much, but usually I see you all covered up. How would you describe your frame? You think it'd be better for like figure?
I probably would be better for figure. I have a more a blockier frame, I guess. Okay.
So you just
Um,
don't have the wasp waist, the little tiny.
no, I don't have a wasp waist, but what I do have is some pretty decent sized delts and a decent back. My waist, not so great. I will say though, after my rib surgery, one side of my waist is small,
Just
which
take
is,
that other one out. Yeah. There's a lot
which
of
is
women that do
actually
that.
hilarious.
Um,
Um, yeah.
did you have a background in powerlifting?
Yeah, I do. So
Have you
actually,
competed there?
yeah, I started lifting and doing this in powerlifting. When I first started lifting, I noticed really quickly how strong I was, and I immediately started like signing up for powerlifting competitions. At the time, I was just coming out of an ED. I'm not sure if I can say that word here, but I just like
An
it.
ED. I'm just a
ED.
dude, so I just think my
Um,
dick not working.
oh,
This is where my brain goes.
disordered eating. So I
Oh,
was
okay, okay.
Yeah, I was just coming out of that sort of phase of my life where I was really thin. I was like 95 pounds. But even being 95 pounds, weak as hell, well, not weak as hell, but 95 pounds, frail looking, like literally looking like a skeleton. You could see veins going all over the place. I was able to bench 95 pounds. So I guess like it, I noticed quickly that my baseline was a lot higher than what it should be. And that if I were to compete, I probably would beat out my weight class, which I did when I went in. So,
Nice. What's your best lift, you would say?
Um, Pound for pound, I would have to say my bench is pretty impressive for my size. The highest I got was 185.
Uh, and what
Uh,
was the body weight then?
yeah, actually, wait, no. 185 was the easiest, well, was the easiest, heaviest that I've done. 190 was the one that was my max, and then I couldn't freaking hit 200, and I got so pissed off because it was the day before my
So
surgery.
close.
So
Oh no, yeah, you knew wasn't happening for a while after that.
yeah.
So
Um,
when are you going to keep that kind of training style, or do you change it up when you're now that you're trying to possibly do a competition?
I'm definitely going to be changing it up. So I'm focusing more towards like building muscle, focusing more towards, and also keeping my fat down. So like, when people think like putting on muscle, I've noticed that for me personally, just because I have insulin resistant PCOS, it's something I was born with and I've always had. It's very difficult for me to cut fat down, especially if I get too fat. So, probably the way that I will go about it is the whole main gaining thing that I've been preaching, which is kind of ironic, but it's what works for me. So,
Let's talk a little bit real quick about kind of your social media because you've been obviously like blowing up everywhere, right? Like it's got to be kind of cool to see the progress and know that you're actually having an impact on people. I think when I reached out to you, like I don't know anybody, so if you come across me, you're definitely big. So I think you were like at 80,000, and then now you're already it's like 2 weeks later, you're like at 120 almost. So have you been like consciously really putting a lot of effort towards it, or has it just started snowballing? What has been kind of the thing that's really jumped it off?
so to be totally honest, I put zero effort. I literally don't put that much effort in. I've been reposting a lot of videos that I had on TikTok. My TikTok is what initially first grew really fast, but it grew to 100,000. So it was like 100,000 on TikTok is not the same on Instagram, and I've noticed that very clear distinction. With that being said, reposting my videos definitely helped me stay consistent because I've just been so busy lately. I think that the main video that kind of brought me up was the one on Jeff Nippard, just because it was a little more nuanced and also I was I used to be a lot more feisty over on TikTok. I'm sure you've probably seen like my old videos where I'm like sitting there with the tank top and like freaking my voice sounds almost like Greg Doucette a little bit parodying.
It's
Um,
really cool to see how you evolved because I remember I saw one post where somebody was like, "Oh no, is this what it is now? Like you got the titties out and no glasses and like and you're like that's an old one. Like I don't give a shit anymore." So
yeah,
I think that's
no.
pretty cool. It's
Dude,
funny.
I don't give a fuck anymore. To be totally honest with you, the reason why I stopped doing that was because I just didn't care. And it got to the point where it was just so annoying. Like just having to do that. And then on top of that, like it, I used to get so many comments of just like the woman coffee cup thing over on TikTok that I just got sick of it. So I'm just like, oh,
What's that?
it's like the woman teacup thing when they're just like saying like I'm not gonna listen to you because you're a woman
Oh,
or some shit like that.
I know you get a lot. I think a lot of the hate that you get is just because you're a girl.
I'm gonna be honest, like I started off not thinking that it would be like that because I hear so much in the fitness space, like, oh yeah, we're all equal, we're all this. Like on the surface level, the fitness space seems so great and seems so accepting. The second you enter it, it's really not.
Well,
But it
as you get bigger too, right? You expose
yeah.
yourself to so much more. So it's like at this point, like I don't like you tell me, what do you get more of? Like what kind of incel do you get more? Do you get like an incel woman hater who like tries to talk shit to you, or do you get like the incel who calls you mommy and say all this crazy shit?
I would say I typically get more of neither. I get mostly the guys that say, because I'm not like showing off anymore, I don't really get the mommy incel guys. It's mainly just like guys that are really salty that I'm explaining something to them, and they just like they type out this long freaking book paragraph, and they're like commenting over and over and over again, and I'll get like what like uh thousands upon thousands of comments on one video, and then I'll get like a DM of some random salty guy saying, "Why didn't you respond to my comment?" And I'm like,
Well, you
It's
do respond to so many too. Do you think that
a
just kind of like
try.
fans the flames? I mean, it's in a certain way, it's cool to see you like defend yourself. Do you feel like sometimes your interactions leads to more like negativity potentially? Like at a certain point, you're gonna be so big, it's like not even gonna be worth it to do it, you know?
Yeah, I've noticed that it's a little bit of both. So like if I don't engage, then I get negativity because then they start going they go after my DMs pretty hard. So it's either I don't respond and then I get negativity in the form of a video or in a DM, or I respond and then I just get literally reply after reply after reply until there's a chain of like 100 plus comments. So it's like you can't really win. And I've noticed that at this point, I just accept the fact that I can't win and I just move on with my life. So I'll reply to a few of like comments, especially if they're asking questions. Yeah, so I've accepted the fact I can't make everyone happy. So I answer the questions. I try to engage in like thoughtful critique. Like if especially if somebody doesn't understand what I'm trying to say or if they misconstrue something and they're taking it out of context, I'm always open to like having a good critical like discussion. And that's
How
kind of
often
what I
does that happen?
it doesn't happen often. Like I think one of the few times was that one time with his name's Andrew, I believe. And we had a discussion over on Colton's podcast. And it was a very good, thoughtful discussion, even though like I feel like the main source of disagreement came from the fact that he just didn't understand some of the definitions. I'm more than happy to help walk people through those definitions. And then by the end of it, he did agree with some of the stuff that I was saying, despite him having like a disagreement or two. Like everybody's going to disagree about something. But it's always important to understand where people are coming from because that's the only way that we advance as a society is if we take what we learn from people that we disagree with and we use it towards bettering our own knowledge base and improving upon that. So it's not like I don't like going at like at least currently. I'm not sure. You'll probably find a video of me like back in TikTok days, me being super freaking feisty. Anyways, I try to be more like understanding of the other side because everybody has different opinions. So
What was it that you and Nippard had the back and forth about?
oh, we had two back and forths actually. So one was more public, one was less public. The first one was more public and it was about stretch mediated hypertrophy. I
Okay.
personally don't see a reason to emphasize the stretch part of a movement just
So is this
because
like length and partials or just like stretch under load? Okay, so like length and
yeah, so
partials.
it's like lengthen partials and then like doing like Bayesian curls and like going above and beyond to like bend yourself backwards trying to stretch.
Yeah, okay, 100%. Yeah.
I don't see the point in that. And to be totally honest, a lot of the movements that are like, for example, what is it? The exorcism curl that Dr. Mike Israetel did.
Yeah.
It biomechanically, it's not really much different from other types of curls. So it's like y- you're just kind of making yourself look a little foolish to get what? A hypothetical benefit that hasn't really been proven because there's not really a mechanism for it. Like there's so much we don't know about muscle hypertrophy. Jumping the gun and saying it's all about the stretch is very premature, especially considering when the most of the data we have is outcome and we don't have nearly enough mechanistic data to say, hey, this outcome is connected to the stretch mechanistically. We can't say that yet. We can just say that based off of this, a bunch of untrained and trained individuals grew when they pushed themselves really hard in the gym. That's like the basic idea of those studies, where they're like pushing really hard until they have to go to like quote unquote failure, and then they do those stretch mediated, like those stretch partials, right? Um, that's putting out a lot of effort. That's not something you see in a lot of studies. So when you do that, you have to account for the effort before you jump the gun and say, hey, it's all about the stretch, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I'm just saying, like, if I do lengthen partials, it's because that's all I've got left in me. And I can't either hit the full shorten range. And I'm at that point, like, already at failure as far as the full shorten range goes. But yeah, in general, I mean, wouldn't you say, like, hypertrophy is like a hard thing to get really, really good studies, like, for? Is there any particular study that comes to mind that has had a big influence or any research that's had an influence on you as far as your thoughts on hypertrophy, muscle building, or your own training?
Yeah, so a big reason why I don't really advocate for overly emphasizing the stretch part of a movement is because based off of what we know about like just what hypertrophy is, there have been some recent studies coming out that electrical stimulation can induce hypertrophy, which would insinuate that there is an additional mechanism aside from just stretching. And I know this is going to sound like a bunch of jargon, but stretching the nucleus of, and not really nucleus in quotation marks, but I'm just like, I'm trying not to make it super crazy complicated. But basically, you're stretching the nucleus. Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Still got your
The
face. You're good.
and you're basically getting YAPTAZ transcriptional coactivators and other things into the nucleus, which then promote transcription and then muscle growth, all that fun stuff, satellite cells going into pre-existing muscle fibers, causing that muscle fiber to grow. All the things that we know about muscle hypertrophy, they can be explained partially through stretch, but we also have another like electrically stimulated hypertrophy is something that has not really been thoroughly explained. So, and that would insinuate that just similar just having like a brain signal or something to depolarize the muscle cell membrane could potentially induce hypertrophy. We don't know everything. So it's something that we need to further explore. And then on top of that, based off of studies that compare the what is it? The gene expression associated with the concentric and eccentric portions of a movement, there's growth and atrophy related transcription, like transcription and gene expression that's associated with both types of movements. So neither the concentric nor the eccentric is better. They both have something to offer. They both have quote unquote cons. Like the eccentric portion tends to be more fatiguing. However, there are growth factors associated with it. Similarly, it's the same thing with concentric. Like there are growth factors associated with it, but there is less fatigue there as well. So it's like to get the full benefit and the full picture, you shouldn't just be focusing on one part of the movement. You should focus on both.
Yeah, so I mean, you think the short range is important too to finish out the movement. Yeah,
Like I think that
exactly.
the main part in hypertrophy that matters is the effort. If you
Yeah.
push yourself hard, you're gonna grow. Like I don't think anybody's gonna argue with that. Um, Whether or not you need to overemphasize the stretch, now that's a whole other discussion that we can't really say yet.
Was that the only thing you guys had a disagreement about? Was just the effectiveness of length and partials? Anything else?
Oh, and then there was also the bulking discussion. So
Okay.
in this video, he primarily argued that bulking was beneficial because our bodies don't prefer to put on muscle, like ancestrally, I guess. Only issue, muscle is technically a vital part of our body, like for movement, like just in general, like even as like hunters and gatherers, if we didn't have muscle, we would be not alive. Especially if we're running all over the place trying to catch prey, trying to collect berries or food. Like muscle is so incredibly important, not to mention all the metabolic signaling it participates in. It also acts as like a protein reserve as well because you have a lot of muscle protein there and fat storage is not really protein, so it's like it's a little easier to get that protein from. Of course, it's not something we want to do, and that's not really the purpose of muscle, which is mainly my argument. That muscle is a vital part of movement, not a vital part of energy storage. It's not physiologically used for energy. If we use muscle tissue for energy, that's what we typically refer to as disease cachexia when we are, or like starvation or um, anorexia, that sort of stuff. Like when we're talking about using muscle for energy, it's always in a pathological state. But when we use fat for energy, that's physiological. We use our fat stores for energy because that's what they're for. Um, so when somebody says that you need to be in an energy surplus to build muscle, I have to disagree with that because when you're if somebody was in a coma and you force fed them calories, they don't grow muscle, they grow fat. Now, if you threw in training, of course they're going to grow muscle because you threw in a stimulus. But take that stimulus away, the extra calories aren't going towards your muscle, no matter how much you wish and pray for it. So eh, that's the whole point that I at least was presenting. Now, the only issue is that when we do studies on people who aren't training and you do overfeeding, they're still moving. They're not in a coma. We don't do studies on coma patients because that breaks a lot of ethics. But people who are morbidly obese or diagnosed with morbid obesity, diagnosed with obesity, they're moving around. They're moving around a significant amount of weight. So obviously, when you overfeed individuals of that size or individuals who are of size, they're moving around more weight than before. So that in and of itself is a stimulus to grow muscle. It may not be super extreme, which is why we see that individuals who are overfed gain significantly more fat than muscle. That being said, it's still like you can't force feed muscle, is my point.
So are you like, is it kind of like the same thing as the Doucette kind of thought process, the main gain, or do you have like a different take on it as far as like calories, how much you should go over maintenance or anything like that?
So, just to explain briefly, when I'm talking about maintenance, I'm talking about maintenance in like the actual scientific definition, which is replacing your total daily energy expenditure with your diet. And I think that we can both agree that that would be considered like the scientific, the physiological version of maintenance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so total daily energy expenditure or TDEE replaced with your diet is maintenance calories. Now, if you eat above that, so let's say you have all the calories that you expend in a day and you ate all of that in your diet, but then on top of that, you had Andrew's IHOP pancake stack, or like you had let's say what's another one? You had the Rock's cheat meal on top of that. All those calories are on top of your TDE. That is a surplus. And most of those calories are going to be going towards your fat storage because you are no longer replacing what you burnt throughout the day. Now, if you undereat that, you undereat your total daily energy expenditure, you're going to dip into your fat storage because, well, obviously now you can't sustain your body if you don't have more energy. So you're going to dip into your extra storage of energy, which is
Can I
your
ask you a
fat.
question real quick? Just because I don't know a lot about this kind of stuff. I'm a biomechanics guy. I know
Go
the way
right
the
ahead.
body works. So like, is there a certain, is if you're like in a big surplus or you're at, say you're at the TDEE, you're just doing maintenance. Are you like, is your glycogen like fully saturated or can you store stuff in your muscle? You're saying like you don't got room in there and now it's going to adipose tissue, or I don't really know the mechanisms. I'm sure it's like a percentage of each that go there, but are you saying basically we're not going to store any more in the glycogen at that point?
Yeah, so basically, glycogen is always being used, it's always being added onto. However, generally speaking, if you are eating at your total daily energy expenditure prior to exercise, if you have a decent amount of carbohydrates, you can saturate your glycogen stores pretty like much the entire way. I say pretty much loosely because there's no way to really measure that on a consistent basis because, well, you're constantly moving. I'm using glycogen while I'm doing this. This is using a little bit of glycogen here and there. Like it's not biology isn't black and white. So like when you're talking about like eating in a surplus, let's think about like where the majority of those calories are going towards, and the majority will go towards fat storage because, well, you're putting on a lot of weight and that weight is staying on. If it was coming off, then that would be glycogen.
So would it be different for like an enhanced guy? Do you think they have any benefits from going slightly higher than a complete natural?
Well, I would say that it's just a faster process for enhanced individuals, and that enhanced individuals would have to increase their calories at a faster rate because they would be gaining more metabolically active tissue. And this is where I kind of get into like what is included in TDEE. And because protein synthesis is a physiological process, a part of your resting energy expenditure or resting what is it? Resting metabolic rate,
Yeah.
RMR? Yeah. Resting metabolic rate. That's the, I guess, resting energy expenditure, REE, resting metabolic rate, whatever you want to call it. Because protein synthesis is a part of that, then if you're replacing what the energy that it takes to do that, you're still in maintenance. So if you're replacing the energy that it takes to build new muscle proteins, that's still maintenance because it's protein synthesis. You can't just say, hey, protein synthesis is occurring in this tissue rather than, let's say, your skin tissue. So therefore, it's no longer a part of maintenance calories. Unfortunately, protein synthesis in biology is still protein synthesis. So, like, if you were to, every time your skin turns over, like, for example, if you cut yourself and that skin grows back anew, that's protein synthesis occurring. And when you replace the calories that you burned to heal your cut, that's still TDEE.
For me, like I'm the kind of guy I've never had a like a high body fat at all. So I've tried to do the bodybuilder style where like you push food like as hard as you can. And I mean, the most weight I ever gained was my freshman year of college. First semester was the only time of my life I didn't have to work. And so like I ate a pizza on top of everything and I ate as much as I could. Still didn't put on like that much body fat. I put on 35 pounds, and that was natural. So, I mean, I'm sure there was body fat, but for me, I never got above that 12% or so. Is there like a biological argument or like a physiological argument that people try to make for the old school style of just having a big surplus? Like, what is the argument that they give you?
So mainly the argument they give me is just kind of I hate to say this, but it is kind of flawed. It's either a misconception of like what they understand as TDEE. So for example, when I was talking with Andrew, which is probably the only other person who's had a critical discussion with me on like face to face, is he couldn't put protein synthesis in TDEE because of his beliefs, which unfortunately
What is it?
just does
What does that mean? How does it not go into
not.
your TE?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So like if we're including all protein synthesis or if we're including some protein synthesis in TDEE, like healing a cut or turning over your bodily tissues, which we know if you're maintaining your bodily tissues, you're doing protein synthesis. That's always happening. In fact, like there's some peptide hormones which quite literally require protein synthesis. So if we're including that, all protein synthesis has to be in that sort of bubble, at least in terms of like when we're talking about like physiological processes that count as like, okay, this is what we need to keep ourselves alive. It's kind of a part of that. Now, that all being said, the main argument that kind of goes into it is they argue that because new tissue is being added, that it is above your TDEE. However, we don't store energy in the form of muscle. That's not physio. We don't physiologically use muscle for energy. So that's the difference between storing energy in the form of fat versus energy in the form of muscle. Like extra energy goes towards fat. That is something we know. That's why obesity exists. That's why you can get over fat. And if we stored energy in the form of muscle to use later, then some obese people might end up being bodybuilders, which you don't see that. I mean, do you?
No.
So like, I mean, unless you're talking about somebody who has some like crazy genetics, then you're not really seeing that. Now, on top of that, combine that with gear usage, which definitely increases the rate of protein synthesis and definitely is going to increase the amount of muscle that you can gain in any like a given amount of training. Because of that, the rate of muscle growth is at such a fast rate that you're putting on weight like this throughout the course of time. So it almost feels like you're in a surplus because you're constantly trying to catch up with that. I mean, you're literally on super physiological levels of hormones, which you should feel super physiological. I mean, it's in the name. Um, that said, like if you're natural, it's at a very slow rate. I did a little bit of math based off of cross-sectional area from 4 studies in trained individuals, and it turns out that a very trained individual who's training very like to failure, training hard, and is gaining a reasonable amount of muscle probably only gains about half, I believe it was 8 ounces of muscle over the course of 8 weeks, spread out throughout the muscles that we usually train. So like
Sounds
bicep,
like a good
tricep.
amount, actually.
Yeah, and it also actually it would correlate with the amount of muscle that is estimated to be gained in like a pound of muscle and like the amount of calories that it would take. And that would equate to increasing your calories by 20 calories a day, which is like as a natural, you're really gonna call that a surplus? Like that could be chalked up to error.
Right. I
And
mean, you can change like one thing in your day, like take an extra walk around the block, you know?
yeah, not to mention like even calling it a surplus is just wrong because again, it's protein synthesis. So it all comes down to definitions, and I feel like there's a lot of people who just don't understand the definition. Um, and I understand why it can be confusing, especially when you're talking about the addition of new tissue. Like when you look at it from a macro level, like, oh, somebody went from 120 pounds to 140 pounds of lean tissue throughout the course of their lifetime. How did they not do that in a surplus? Well, here's the thing. It took them like 40 years to get there. So like it's when you're it takes you 40 years and you're putting on grams of tissue, it's not really a surplus now, is it? It's just you're talking about it on like from point A to point B. That's like saying a child who grew from 5'0" to 5'10" was eating in a surplus, but really they just grew because they were a kid and they grew up to an adult. And I'm sure like most people would not say that a child who is eating the amount of calories they need to grow is eating in a surplus because otherwise childhood obesity wouldn't exist.
So do you think a lot of it's just like semantics with a lot of the stuff you have going on with some of these fellas?
It's a lot of semantics, but I feel like the semantics can be important for at least female people in terms of like females and naturals. Females and naturals, I feel like the semantics matter because when you tell somebody who's natural or is female that they need to bulk to gain muscle, many naturals and many girls will not have a good time with that. First of all, many naturals will go too far. They will become fluffy. They will literally just bulk up to cut back down to the same exact body weight. Not to mention the dynamics of fat cells that are like the actual biological dynamics of fat cells, adipogenesis, lipogenesis, all that fun stuff can go really wrong if you have bad genetics. And gaining and losing weight in like weight cycling is not good. And we know that it's not healthy. And it does promote the development of chronic disease later in life. So if you're trying to make it easier to lose weight and stay lean, you probably shouldn't be weight cycling as a natural. That just, you shouldn't. And then, especially if you're doing it to the extent that many naturals will be doing it because they're not on super physiological levels of hormones. So they aren't gaining muscle at a super physiological rate. So they're gaining like what, 8 grams of tissue over the course of, I don't know, I didn't do the math right. They're gaining what? I want to say 20 calories worth of tissue a day, and they're eating 200 plus calories over their maintenance a day. That you're putting so much away as fat. Why are you doing that to yourself? And then over time, you're gonna have to lose that, and you're literally just basically cutting back down to the same. And that's for
Can you
natural.
can
Oh,
you
go
go
ahead.
into a little bit of the regain, like the thing that you sent me? Like
Oh yeah,
basically
sure.
like when you go back up to the weight, like the effect it has on the fat cells?
Yeah, so we recently found this out. It's very recent studies in 2024, but fat cell epigenetics, basically fat cells have memory and they remember uh when they were larger. And the issue is not the number of fat cells. And this is I think where Jeffrey GVS I want to say.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure that I get his name right. Jeffrey, okay. Um this is kind of where he kind of misconstrued the reason why I cited what I cited.
This was in the video?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pull
Un
it up in a second. Yeah.
yeah. So basically, the entire idea is like fat cell hyperplasia, which is increasing the number of fat cells you have, is not a bad thing. The number of fat cells that you have, if it's increasing, not really a horrible thing. In fact, it's actually pretty good. Adiponectin, sorry, adiponectin levels typically will be lower if the more fat cells you have and the smaller those fat cells are, which just to like keep that thing simple, it's the higher your adiponectin levels are, the worse off you are like metabolically for health. Um, and also like insulin sensitivity reasons as well. So insulin resistance tends to occur with the larger your fat cells are because of that damaged, dysfunctional metabolic signaling. So fat cell hyperplasia is actually good. We don't hate hyperplasia. However, with that being said, the when you constantly increase the number of fat cells and then lower back down, at some point you're going to be growing the actual size of those fat cells rather than the number. And that's when it becomes a problem.
Okay. Yeah, I never thought that. I was kind of thought the opposite actually, but like I said, I don't really know. So is it okay if I play that and you kind of respond a little bit of it?
Yeah.
So I watched the reel, and I'm actually shocked that no one else caught this. The number she's circling, 35 to 36% body fat.
So
Yeah.
pause.
So yeah, what's that in reference to?
So here he's basically saying that because these individuals are more on the overweight side, that this study is not a good representation of like how adipogenesis occurs. Now, the entire point of this study was to demonstrate how in the early stages of a caloric surplus, that adipogenesis will occur. And we actually have seen this in other studies too. This one just so happened to have a histological sample of actual fat cells, which he also shows a little bit later on. So I'll let him go ahead.
Healthy individuals who are pretty high. It is a mixed cohort, so about half men, half women, but still averaging 35, 36% body fat. Maybe the women are 40-ish, the men are 30-ish. I don't think that is representative of the average person who is considering bulking. If you are 30% body fat, you have no business even
So pause.
about.
So the whole point of the quote unquote main gaining thing that I promote is to be a healthy body fat percentage. If you're underweight and you actually need to increase your body fat, then you should bulk. Same thing goes for like if you're overweight, you should cut. Like I'm not arguing that you should bulk when you're a twig. I got tagged in this one kid's reel and he was like bulking is vaulted and he's like literally I was scared for him and I was sitting there like, dude, the main gaining thing is not for you. Trust me.
Yeah, bro, just go nuts for a couple months and then you can put a
Yeah.
main gain later.
Yeah, and that's actually what I did was initially when I was really, really skinny and I was 95 pounds, I bulked up until I was 115, and then I continuously maintained for the course of a year, and I gained about 15 more pounds, but I was still the same like relative body fat. So like when we're talking about this is not supposed to be like when I'm talking about like taking another population or somebody who's overweight or whatnot, this is demonstrating a physiological example of what happens when you gain fat. Because no matter how much you want to deny it, adipogenesis occurs. And like for fat cell hyperplasia, you add more fat cells and you can't get rid of them. That's just like you can't just like say, okay, well, of course, unless you do liposuction. Liposuction. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Lipo.
where I'm from, and all my women, they got all their fat cells removed out here in Newport Beach.
Yeah, so unless you got liposuction, Jesus Christ. Liposuction.
It's
Can't even.
not even a hard one, I
Yeah,
fuck
it's
up a
not even a
lot
hard one.
too.
But yeah, so that's the whole point there. Is like I'm not saying hyperplasia is bad. In fact, hyperplasia is benign. It's neither good nor bad. The issues arise when you continuously do this over and over again because you expect it to actually do something. And
So like repeated exposure is worse, like it makes it
yeah.
okay, yeah.
And that was the study that I was like talking about earlier with the epigenetics, was how epigenetics and how fat cells, when you repeatedly expose yourself to weight gaining cycles and weight cycling, that leaves you off in a worse place metabolically than it would if you just consistently slowly increased the calories on the basis of adding more lean tissue, which would be a part of your TDEE. So if you just main gain, I really hate that word, but maintain your way up, then that's a better way to do it. That's more metabolically healthy.
Is there like body fat that you would say is like kind of the bottom level that you would need to be able to main gain?
Yeah, so I would say do it at a level where you don't constantly feel hungry. That's the most important part. You want to feel psychologically and physically healthy. You want to be a healthy body fat percentage. So, first of all, get yourself some fat calipers, take pictures of yourself, like look at yourself. And if you're seeing veins everywhere, if you look like a rib cage, eat more food. I'm not arguing. Eat more food. Like if you literally look like a rib cage, if you look like my skeleton model, please eat more food. Um, that said, if you look like you are a decent human being, that you are just a healthy body fat percentage and you don't necessarily need to bulk up, you don't necessarily need to cut back down. You have visible abs on either side, like you have the lines on either side, maybe like a four pack if you tend to hold fat down there. Um, yeah, it's not as serious as people are making. out to be.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to me that it's become such a big thing because I don't like I mean I don't like I said I don't think it's anything super crazy. I think a lot of it comes down to the whole like we talked about just the language of it. You know, they hear maintenance and they hear you accounting for, tissues growing and they're like, well, that's a surplus. And so I think a lot of it is just, some of it is just wanting to argue and some of it is, like I said, not quite grasping exactly what you're conveying. Is there anything else specifically you wanted to talk about in that video at all?
Uh, n-
We-
I mean, I guess we could look at the histology briefly because he did say that it like didn't look like there was a difference. There is a very clear difference. So if you could just scroll to that part where there's that histology slide, it's
Yeah.
like basically two pictures next to each other with a bunch of dots. So you see those cells right there, like they're like just big circles
Yeah.
in that like that last frame on the very bottom.
Yeah.
That's like the most clear histology slide that you're gonna see. Now on baseline, that is at the baseline level. They did not do overfeeding yet. Do you see how many cells there are? They're a little bit bigger, right?
And that you're referring to which one?
On the very bottom,
This one. Yeah. Can you see my scroller at all?
yep.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
So you see how each of those little circle-y looking,
Yeah.
those are fat cells. Now, if you go to the picture that's directly next to it, or yeah, right there, look at how you see those cells are smaller
Yeah.
and there's more of them. That's fat cell hyperplasia. That's the only reason why I cited that study was because it demonstrated it so clearly.
And-
So that goes to show short-term overfeeding, hyperplasia. That was the only reason I cited it. Uh,
Okay.
of course, it got taken so out of context to the point where people thought that hyperplasia was bad, which I feel so badly about because I feel like I did potentially word it, or at least I used a video that worded it in a way that made it sound like hyperplasia was bad, but hyperplasia is benign. It's not the issue. It's the constant like weight cycling that's the biggest problem.
It's interesting. Do you think that your history with the ED, like, I mean, didn't like inform you necessarily on your opinion, but do you think it influenced you on maybe how passionate you are about it?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it's a very big reason why I'm passionate about it. A lot of my female clients too, they've noticed that whenever they start lifting is their weight loss slows down and it becomes very discouraging to them because they associate weight, just the weight on the scale with body fat loss. So when we're talking about like the movement of the weight on the scale, we have to remember that muscle has weight. And also, that muscle can be built in a deficit. We can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. That is something we do know can occur. And when it does occur, it slows down the amount of weight that you actually lose on the scale. So, a lot of people who have like that eating disorder mentality and have a prone like nature to that and have an insecurity that's rooted in that area, it makes it 10 times worse. And there was one time in particular, it was right after surgery, and I've said this story a few times. I really hate using anecdote, but it really does demonstrate why I'm passionate about it. I was trying to lose a little bit of the fluff that I gained over the course of like going through the surgery. And just started lifting again. I was in my like little boot, so all I could do was lift. I couldn't really go for runs. I couldn't do my cardio. So I was losing weight very slowly, like to the point where I wasn't even really losing weight. And it was like maybe a quarter of a pound, but I really couldn't tell because it was like water fluctuations as well. So I was really insecure about that. I cut my calories down really, really low. However, because I wasn't doing any cardio, it was like barely a deficit. So as I started losing body fat, my weight stayed relatively similar because I was also gaining muscle at the time. I was going through muscle memory because I hadn't lifted in like forever. So as my weight stayed the same and I got leaner and leaner and leaner until I literally could see veins on my abs. And my partner looked at me and he goes, "You are really skinny now. And even though you may not have looked like, I literally only lost 2 pounds, but I looked really lean." And my partner was getting worried for me and told me to increase my calories. So it's like, even a difference of 2 pounds can look really different if you do it really subtly. and it can be really mentally fucking with you if you don't understand it. So the fact that a lot of people misconstrue like weight maintenance with like maintenance calories, it bothers me because you can be in a calorie deficit and lose body fat, but still maintain the same body weight because of water weight, because of glycogen, because of gaining muscle. And there's so many other reasons why your weight might not be moving. So equating weight maintenance with the weight like calorie maintenance with the weight on the scale, it just doesn't make sense, at least physiologically.
And I'm like the opposite. A lot of us dudes are like if I see a weight on the scale, like maybe I look good, but it's a little lower than what I want, and I'm jump off and go Chick-fil-A this morning for some breakfast and load up a little bit more. So I definitely have the opposite than you and the most ladies. Is there somebody who's been like a big supporter of you? Like who's been on your side? I guess Doucette? Who else? Because I feel like most people are going
Oh,
against you.
you'd be surprised, but Dr. Contreras has been kind of silently rooting me on from the sidelines, and he sends me a lot of really awesome papers. I've learned so much from him, and it's been really fun learning more about like muscle hypertrophy and also discussing my opinions on like bulking and cutting because he has a lot of female clients. He does a lot of work. He's got, I mean, the glute lab, obviously, so female clients all over the place. And um he shared the same sort of stories with me where it was like a lot of female clients don't like seeing the weight not go down because they're programmed to think that weight maintenance is the same as weight like calorie maintenance. And so they associate it with the same thing. So when they don't see the weight going down, they drop the calories even more until they feel like absolute garbage. And it's like it's not a healthy thing to like promote. So even though like I mean if it works for guys, that's cool, but we shouldn't just like ignore physiology and only acknowledge one half of the like client population because of that.
And then, so, I mean, talking about weight loss, we could kind of segment this into some drug talk. We could go into the GLP-1. So where I'm at in Newport Beach, none of my clients really take them, but just about every other woman I see has got the Ozempic face. And I was pretty critical of GLP-1s just because I think my personal opinion, again, I don't know a lot, so my opinion doesn't mean that much, but I think perhaps they're dosed too high and too long. I don't know if it's something that we want to be on like forever at a certain point. I think if you go really high, I think the gastric emptying can get so slow. Like I had one client who was on it and he just looked like shit. And he was a dude, and like as soon as he got off of it, like his like metabolism ramped up, and he just looked a million times better. And so I think it's something that's pretty easy to overdo, but I was really interested in the tirzepatide. I'm actually just started it. I started what I showed you something that's really similar. I started doing like the smallest little dose. Ideally, I'm thinking about doing it for like 10 to 12 weeks to help potentially get some things improving my insulin sensitivity and nutrition partitioning and things like that. So I was wondering if you could go over some of your thoughts on tirzepatide and GLP-1s in particular, and some of the mechanisms of actions and how you think they could be applied for weight loss, and if you think there's a use in a bodybuilding context at all.
So currently I actually prefer retatrutide over tirzepatide because it's a triple agonist rather than just a dual agonist like tirzepatide. It acts on the glucagon receptor, glucose-dependent insulin-tropic peptide, or GIP, the GIP receptor, and then also the GLP-1 receptor as well. So it's a triple hitter. So rather than just hitting the GIP and the GLP-1, it also has the glucagon receptor, which is really beneficial, at least in terms of like balancing its effect, especially in a metabolically healthy individual such as yourself. Um, of course, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really prescribe anything. So just putting that out there. Also, just to, I guess, preface, I would say that GLP-1 agonists primarily benefit those who are metabolic, like experience metabolic dysfunction. I don't think that it should be promoted to people who are not, do not have like dysfunctional metabolisms. Like you wouldn't prescribe diabetes medication to somebody who isn't a diabetic.
I still
And
use insulin.
yeah, so I guess like it's different for bodybuilders, but like generally speaking, I would say retatrutide is better for like the
Is that
individuals
older
who are,
than tirzepatide, or did it come out later?
oh, it's newer. It's
Newer? Okay.
the most recent, yeah.
Okay.
Um Now just to like quickly fix one piece of misinformation that I've noticed going around. Just because it does slow gastric emptying does not mean that it slows down metabolism.
Yeah.
It's it
Well,
just can,
I think just because people stop eating is what makes them not eat. And
oh
then,
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that is the main part. So even low dosing tirzepatide, you're not necessarily going to like because you're still getting the slowed effect of of the digestion because or I just said digestion with quotation marks. I meant to say metabolism. Okay. Okay. So basically, you're still gonna have the slow digestion. It's you can't really like the thing about the thing about agonists is you're agonizing the receptor. You can't just like partially agonize it unless it is a partial agonist. Um, tirzepatide, it has a high affinity for the GIP and a low affinity for the GLP-1. So it does enhance insulin synthesis. So I mean, I could see that like being beneficial. I will say I would prefer retatrutide for
Yeah, look
metabolic.
into that. I hadn't heard of that. And this is shit that I'm like totally just going by to see my pants on. Just, not something I would recommend or say is optimal.
Yeah.
What is the effect on the actual like mitochondria function and ability? Do you know?
So retatrutide and tirzepatide primarily act the with blood sugar metabolism. So I haven't seen a lot of research on its effect in mitochondria. I mean, maybe there's some stuff in mice. I mainly pulled up some stuff on obesity, glucose metabolism, and I also did find something in some mice here discussing how tirzepatide can augment amino acid content in skeletal muscle. So,
I think that's the one that people use. I think that's the one I heard. Yeah.
that's like implicating that
But
it can help with it, but just increasing the amount of amino acids in your skeletal muscle doesn't really mean you're going to get more muscle growth because muscle growth is primarily a signaling dependent process in the sense that if you're not training, no matter how many amino acids are stuffed into your muscle, it's not going to grow. So, that's the idea. Like you need a little bit of that stimulus alongside the protein. The protein definitely helps. I mean, I'm sure there is some sort of augmenting effect, some sort of improving effect. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
what are your
It's
thoughts on like a cut or like a getting ready for a contest prep?
oh yeah. I could see that being beneficial. Like I just it's difficult for me to like come to a consensus when all of the data is in individuals with type 2 diabetes.
Do you
So it's like
think
sort of
you think it
thing.
could have a difference on your appearance, just the way you're presenting?
Um, well, I mean, if you're altering glucose metabolism, you might have less glycogen storage
Because
because,
basically, 'cause Dr. Mike looked like shit whenever he competed. I know he was using pretty high dose
oh,
tirzepatide, and like he had like a weird look to his muscles. Like they weren't full; they looked like soft and like almost squishy. But he was pretty low body fat, and I don't know if to me that made me think of my guy when I saw him on the Ozempic. So, do you think it has an impact on the way you actually present your muscles,
and
like the
actually,
fullness?
I just thought of this. Like, I would take that back. I would say that maybe it increases glycogen content, especially if it's like increasing insulin sensitivity. But I will say I can't say for certain because there's not a lot of data in metabolically like just really healthy individuals. It's mainly individuals with dysfunctional metabolisms, people with type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. So it's hard for me to like come to a conclusion on how it's going to impact glycogen storage. It probably does. I mean, I would not be surprised because it's got a really big effect on glucose metabolism. It's the entire purpose, GLP-1s. Um, that being said, I can't tell you exactly how it's going to impact your glycogen. And I think that the only way we would be able to find that out is if we did a study on bodybuilders. Now, that being said, Dr. Mike also had some like I feel like he had a little bit of trouble with his dieting down. So that probably was the main reason why. And then maybe that could be combined with tirzepatide, but or like made worse by tirzepatide, but it's so difficult to understand how a medication affects individuals that are not diseased when all the research is in diseased populations because their physiology is and their the pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes is eh, a type 2 diabetic individual does not have the same metabolism as an individual who is physiologically healthy. And comparing how a drug works on one to the other is like comparing apples and oranges.
So in general, you like GLP-1s though for weight loss resistance, and in
Yeah.
general, you think they're a good addition to. I mean, this shit like I remember like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people taking fin and just shitting everything out on themselves. Like women would have been
Oh.
dying for this, for years.
Yeah, no, GLP-1s are a far healthier alternative to what we used to have. And especially if we're talking about metabolically healthy, just overweight individuals trying to lose weight, the new additions like tirzepatide and retatrutide, they're so much better than the old GLP-1s, which were only acting on one pathway and mainly designed for individuals with insulin resistance. So I really do like the new addition of them. I think that they're very beneficial for our population.
Do you think it's something that people need to take like forever, or they take it for a while to fix their metabolism while they're doing other things and then get off of it? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that individuals who have a dysfunctional metabolism and are diagnosed with like insulin resistance and stuff like that, they should like I would say it's probably going to be more beneficial if they can find a way off it because it's just financially freeing. Like you're not paying for more medication. I think the end goal should be to be medication free. Of course, some people may not end up that way. Like you can't fix everybody. Some people are going to be chronically insulin resistant, like myself. So it just depends on the individual and it depends on who you're talking about. I I advocate for treating everybody as like their own individual patient. So like if we're talking about it in that sense and we're like saying, okay, well, we're giving out advice, of course, not as doctors, but like if I were to give out advice, it would be to treat yourself as an individual. So don't take just like general advice of like, oh yeah, tirzepatide is good if you're overweight and you should take it forever. No. If you can get off it, then wean off it. But if you can't, then yeah. Just one more thing to say, at least for the anabolic and
Yeah.
individuals who are also dually taking anabolics, I would uh tread with caution. And anabolic androgenic steroids, and those sorts of compounds, they have been found to cause pancreatitis, and GLP-1s specifically have been found to have a side effect of pancreatitis. We don't know if there's any interactions between those two compounds in terms of aggravating it. So if you are on unnatural. And just FYI, acute pancreatitis, it can be lethal, can cause multi-organ failure, and then chronically using like tirzepatide, like for example, if you're chronically using it for every single show that you take or every single show that you do, chronic pancreatitis can lead to pancreatic cancer. So it's something to be aware of. Just like if anybody like is watching this and is unnatural, I would recommend it. And I do have some studies that I cited in my little document here. But
Is there something they should check? Like, is there certain blood levels that you should look for or anything? Like, what can kind of like show you may be at risk for pancreatitis?
I would talk to your doctor about that. I don't know the markers for pancreatitis. I was just looking into the
Okay.
different side effects because I wanted to make sure I covered all the bases here.
Yeah, I
Um,
had no idea about that. That's good to know.
Yeah, and for all of the supplements that you sent over to me, I made sure to due diligence. I looked into the positive and the negative effects. So typically, whenever I do my research, I look up the compound itself and then I dive into both positives and negatives because I like to have a balanced look. Like, I feel like there's benefits to everything, but it's always important to look at the side effects too. So that's
So GLP-1, especially the one that you like, a net positive, you would say, right?
Yeah. I would say retatrutide will be the most positive.
Okay.
Tirzepatide has been found to have less side effects in regards to pancreatitis compared to like Ozempic or semaglutide. So if you are going to go for a GLP-1 as a metabolically healthy individual, I'd go for the one with the least risk for pancreatitis. So that's just my take on that.
Cool. And then we were talking about rapamycin going back and forth, which has been really interesting to me. Like I was saying, I've been seeing it come up a little bit more lately. So what are your thoughts on that, the good and the bad, and what you found out as far as like mechanism of actions and everything?
So, acute usage has been found to potentially improve insulin sensitivity in vitro. Now, I will say this is kind of poor quality evidence, and based off of what we know, rapamycin, I'm pretty sure is a cancer drug. So it
I think
primarily
the main,
for
what I
cancer.
know it from is for organs. receiving organs for organ transplants.
Yep, I'm pretty sure organ transplants, also cancer patients as well, because it inhibits mTOR. So
Yeah,
you're
well, is
at
doesn't
risk.
it like kill your immune system when you take it in high doses?
Yeah,
And so that they want to do that to cancer patients?
no, not
So
not
maybe
patients, but also it could. I'm pretty sure. Let's see over here. I have some of the studies up.
so my understanding, which again could be totally wrong, from what I understand, I do know they use it to get you not to reject organs, but that's a pretty high dose. And then the longevity guys, they use like a really like a fractional dose of that because instead of like fucking up your whole immune system, it kind of like stimulates it a little bit.
Yeah, so rapamycin has been found to play a role in inhibiting tumor growth and tumor apoptosis, and it is FDA approved for certain cancers.
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense. So yeah, it keeps it from being so overactive. Yeah, I get it. But you assuming
But
you
it's
wouldn't do that and be on chemo, I don't know how that would work. That might be bad. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about both chemotherapy or if you're talking about like maybe you have immunotherapy where you're strengthening your immune system
Yeah,
simultaneously, then
yeah,
I could see that being
yeah.
a method of use. But based off of what I found, acute usage of rapamycin can improve insulin sensitivity in vitro. Again, not great evidence, but that is evidence. However, chronic use in humans has been found to cause insulin resistance. So that's another part that should be
Do
mentioned.
you know what doses we're looking at?
Um, Let me see. I have the study up. If
Just
you
curious.
want, I
And
can
like,
send it over.
yeah, sure, that'd be cool. I was just trying to see what the rats were dosed with 2 milligrams per kilogram. So that's a lot then, right?
Yep. So this is in rats. This one is still a pretty good one. So I prefer in vivo over in vitro just because you're talking about the whole animal rather than just like C2, C12 cells. And then I'm pretty sure we've also had some like human studies. I think I accidentally said human studies. Okay, that's a correction. It's all in vivo. That's my bad. So basically what we're looking at is an in vivo study, which is an animal, which once again, better than in vitro because we're not looking at just cells in a petri dish. We're looking at a whole animal. So now, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the research design and methods in more detail, and that will tell you like how they treated the animals. They gave these animals intraperitoneal, which is basically just into peritoneal the peritoneal cavity, I believe it is. It's called. It's peritoneally or yeah, it's
Why do
like
they gotta tell us this? They after 15 days they were killed by decapitation.
oh yeah, that's how animal research tends to go. We
Don't throw
can't
that tagline in there. I don't want to know. I'm good. I don't need to know that with this.
Unfortunately, we that's just how animal work undergoes. It can be pretty brutal. Now, if you go down a little bit more, you're gonna see a hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp somewhere.
Chronic rapamycin treatment coordinately downregulates genes required for lipid uptake and storage in adipose tissue. What does that mean?
Yeah, so you're downregulating the genes required for uptaking lipids, so like free fatty acids in the bloodstream, and basically you're downregulating their ability to be stored as adipose tissue or fat tissue. So remember how I was saying how fat cell hyperplasia can help with insulin sensitivity?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is basically suppressing that. So
Okay.
you're increasing insulin resistance chronically through this. And this is primarily because suppress um when you suppress your ability for like fat cell hyperplasia, or I don't know why I keep using freaking quotations, but when you suppress when you suppress fat cell hyperplasia, you're also by extension increasing intracellular fat because where is that fat going to go now? So now that's going to occur. And intramyocellular fat plays a really big role in insulin resistance. In fact, it's one of the primary causes of insulin resistance. And just having like fat floating around is never a good thing. So that was another thing that was found, I believe, in another study that was done where they found that rapamycin increased either LDL cholesterol or I was looking at a different one, but
So
um,
what are the longevity guys? What's their purpose for it? What do they say when they're using it? What's the benefit that they get?
well, a lot of people say that using rapamycin can help prevent cancer and help prevent aging, but rapamycin is also a basically a protein synthesis inhibitor. And you're also going to be likely causing some of this effect where you're going to be getting that insulin resistance. So while I do think that there is a time and place for rapamycin, I don't think that that time and place is chronically throughout the course of your life. You should never be just chronically inhibiting something that's never going most I shouldn't say never, but that's 9 times out of 10 not going to be a positive effect. Because if you're inhibiting anything, why was that thing active in the first place? Like, what was the physiological purpose of mTOR? Protein synthesis, muscle growth, insulin action. Like, that's mTOR quite literally phosphorylates AKT or one of the mTOR complexes. So I can't remember the exact one. It's either mTORC1 or mTORC2, but one of them phosphorylates and basically helps to activate AKT, which by extension acts through the metabolic arm of insulin signaling to allow glucose uptake. So without mTOR, you don't have glucose uptake by insulin. You don't have that extra glycogen. You don't have muscle protein synthesis because you're inhibiting mTOR. So obviously this is like you're not constitutively like blocking mTOR from ever working, but it's also not a good thing if you're constantly trying to inhibit it. So I wouldn't recommend just like always taking rapamycin. And like it's not really, again, it's not proven to work well in healthy human individuals. So like when we're talking about diseased populations versus healthy populations, they're apples and oranges.
So is that why they take such a low dose? And maybe it's supposed to be some kind of like, yeah. What about as far as like gut health? I don't know if you saw any of this stuff for like UC or anything like that. I've seen that potentially it can help with some of the, I think it was intestinal lining and things like that. Did you see anything like that at all?
Yeah, the thing about it is that gut health is like a whole gut health. We don't know that much about gut health. So like when we're talking about like, oh yeah, it benefits gut health. Okay, buddy, the 1% of the stuff that we know about it, we don't even know if it's harming something else about gut health because we don't even know the full extent of gut health. So like when people say that like something benefits gut health, I take it with a grain of salt because we don't even know what actually benefits it. We don't
Now,
know what helps gut health either.
yeah, I mean, if we did, I think all of us bodybuilders would be feeling a lot better, for sure. Are they using them like the longevity guys? They use them for like the telomeres or they're trying to stop cell senescence. Now I'm gonna fuck it up. How do you say it? Cell senescence?
Cell senescence, and
Okay,
actually
cell
it's a
senescence.
really great topic to get into. So one lovely paper that was written by one of my um not my professors, but a professor who I knew in my kinesiology department. Very, very smart professor, and I really enjoyed reading his work. He did a paper that was talking about telomere length and whether or not it played a role in aging and like muscle aging and stuff like that. What he found was that telomere length was not really that statistically significantly affected by aging or looking younger or having like younger genes. And there have been a few studies, and I can send them over as well, that found that, and actually I can send over the entire presentation because I do have that up right now. And I like that presentation and I think it's really good. Basically, what was found was that longer telomeres that are damaged may just be as bad as short telomeres. And the reason being is that damaged telomeres can actually promote damage onto DNA itself. So that's the big conundrum is you can have really long telomeres, but if they're damaged, that's not doing you money. That's not doing you many favors.
What causes damage is like free radicals, oxidation kind of stuff, or
It's just aging. So like you could have really long
just
telomeres.
entropy.
Yeah, you can have really long telomeres as somebody who is really old. And even though that doesn't really make as much sense, but like telomere length can be pretty variable, especially in like white blood cells, which is usually what is measured and what was associated. And there have been some studies on it as well. Let's see if I can add this in here. There we go. So I sent that over to you. That was
Cool.
my old my
Nice.
little
Thank you.
my journal club presentation, but it has all
Oh,
the
cool.
statistics in there.
Cool.
Um, but basically telomeres have been kind of overvalued as being like the lifespan. So telomeres are not just like punching bags for stress. We don't want to just have really long telomeres. We want to have long, intact, non-damaged telomeres, which is not easy to do because damage is always going to happen throughout the course of your life. So that is the idea.
And so, what do you think the longevity guy should be aiming for? If it's not the telomeres, what do you think would be a bigger focus?
Eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly, and not being stressed.
Is there any like pharmaceuticals? These guys love their drugs, like that you think would be helpful for longevity purposes?
Unfortunately not. So even like when we're talking about like L-carnitine, NAD plus, I looked into some of these like I looked into them and like for example, NAD plus, very limited data on pharmacokinetics, especially in humans. We don't even know how to actually administer it and have it stay intact. So like taking NAD plus supplements orally, you're probably not even getting the full benefit of NAD plus because it's just getting broken down and degraded. Same thing goes for like L-carnitine. Like you
Yeah.
excrete most of it that you consume, especially orally. And then even if we're talking about like androgen receptor content for L-carnitine, it was not shown to increase. And then on top of that, if we're talking about like lipid-induced insulin resistance, it wasn't really found to improve that either, at least based off of, and I can pull this study up here. This study, Brawls et al. But like the thing is all of these supplements, they're the small fries, the small parts of your life that don't really matter that much, to be totally frank. If you're eating a well-rounded diet and you're making sure you're getting all your vitamins and minerals, you're going to be far better off than taking methylene blue, for example. So I stress to people who want to improve their longevity to not worry about the little things because that just causes undue stress, which shortens your lifespan in the long run.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. That's why you got to drink, like Dr. Mike was saying, have a glass of wine and that'll make it all
oh
better.
God. I'm
I saw
actually
that he responded to you. That was great.
I'm making another response video. So that's another one that I'm making a response video to because he said that there's like no detrimental side effects to it. Like it's not statistically significant. He's very wrong there. There is statistical significance.
There's
And
some newer stuff that came out, right? Like I heard about something. If I heard about it, like that's I'm
yeah.
surprised he didn't.
Yeah, so low dose alcohol consumption drastically increases your risk of cancer, especially like gastric cancers, which have been increasing in incidence rate so fast that we've dropped the screening year from age 50 to 45, which
Oh,
is
wow.
kind of big considering like life expectancy is still increasing. Like we're still seeing a net positive on that, but the incidence of colon cancer is increasing so quickly that we had to like drop the screening age so we caught more cases. I remember when I was back in high school, people would be like drinking shots and like on the corner of the block and stuff. And so it's like when we're talking about alcohol, promoting or even insinuating that there's a potential benefit is dangerous. And even Dr. Mike himself said, "Oh, I'm sure there's like negative side effects that probably are like outweigh the beneficial effects." Then say that.
Yeah.
Don't say that it potentially has some potential interesting positives and there's a lot of healthy things in wine. You can get those healthy things in wine from grapes and nuts. You don't.
Right. You don't get the buzz. Are there any other like really common for like any other common like myths and misconceptions that us and the health and fitness try to perpetrate that you are trying to go against? Anything that's really common?
Not really. I mean, I'd say I have a pretty balanced outlook on like how I view fitness. Like, I don't think that the carnivore lifestyle, the vegan lifestyle is necessary. Neither one is going to be more beneficial than a well-balanced diet. I don't believe that like overtraining on cardio is going to be great, but of course, like cardio is not the devil. So like it's a I feel like there's so many extremes in the fitness community that we just need to take a step back and recognize that life is humans are strong. We're very strong human beings. Like we're not like going for a walk around the block is not going to kill my gains. I promise you that. But a lot of people make it out to seem like it will. And like if I want to go for a run, it's like, oh, you're going for a run, that's going to kill your gains. No, it won't. Not if I like do take the proper measures and I re make sure I recover. I'll be fine. And I feel like that's like the main thing to like emphasize.
And then can I ask you real quick your opinion on statins and like saturated fat content?
Yes, sure, of course. So, as somebody who works in a cardiology lab, I'm obligated to tell you my research on it because I have quite literally been writing a review on this, or not on this specific topic, but I have been writing a review with some topics that have kind of intertwined with this. So, I work in an arrhythmia lab specifically. Now, Purkinje fibers or the conduction system, or a really large part of the conduction system in your heart, is primarily fueled via glycolysis while the cardiac muscle is primarily fueled by lipids or oxidative phosphorylation. Now, that would initially say, oh, yeah, it's fueled by lipids. We want to be feeding it lipids. Okay, so beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the primary constituent of ketone bodies, was found to cause more severe and fatal arrhythmias in at least mice. So, and also individuals who had higher serum beta hydroxybutyrate with a myocardial infarction or heart attack had a poorer prognosis. So, combining both clinical and in vivo data, it would suggest that eating a keto diet and having a higher serum beta hydroxybutyrate is not beneficial. Now, on top of that, we have meta-regressional data demonstrating that um, dietary cholesterol can indeed increase blood cholesterol given that you are eating like a significant degree. So, like if you're only eating freaking cholesterol. And the reason for this is because, well, if you overeat on cholesterol, and this is a part of the reason why I don't fully agree with the lipid energy model, is if you're overeating on saturated fat and cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol is increasing and that is supposedly not bad for you, there has to be an emptying method. Or like there has to be a clearance. You can't just everlastingly increase something in your blood and expect that to end favorably for you. Because if cholesterol is in your blood, it's not inside of your cells where it should be. And if it's in your cells, that's where it's converting to testosterone. If it's not in your cells, it's not doing that. It's blocking up your arteries. And that's the main reason that I have a big issue with people who promote that is
So
because
even like
they're,
your HDL, if you've got like really high HDL, you still think it should be more
oh yeah, it's
doing its
actually a
job.
hindrance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on recent cardiology, like cardiovascular research, HDL cholesterol and LDL cholesterol are both not good at really high levels. Anything in your blood at really high levels is not good because if it's in your blood, then it's blocking the transport of nutrients, hormones, and everything else, which is what your blood is meant for. It's not meant to transport HDL and LDL. Um, or at least it's not like meant to transport that much of it. So in the same sense that if you intravenously like pumped in a ton of one peptide hormone, that would probably be toxic for you. In the same method, like if you're pumping in a ton of LDL, that's probably not that good for you either. So you can't just like say, "Oh yeah, because I like LDL cholesterol, so it's perfectly fine if it's all the way up to 275." No, that's not. Unfortunately, that's not just not how it works.
And so, what are your thoughts on statins? Like, I've did a pretty deep dive years ago. Like, I did a lot of stats when I was in college. That was like my thing, and I looked at a lot of the research. And there's been a lot more that's come out since then. But I remember my conclusion at the time was statins are like really powerful, cool things for people that are like high risk or have had an issue. But I thought they were a little over prescribed in general. Again, I don't I don't really have much of an opinion because it's hard for me to form one with where I'm at. But what are your thoughts on statins and statin use?
So there have been a lot of correlational data between calcium, like excessive calcium buildup, I believe, and I believe that's what it was. It was like excessive intracellular calcium buildup and statin usage, and like calcium toxicity. However, all of that is really correlational. So another thing that can increase calcium levels is just like arrhythmias and like um poor calcium handling, which already causes a lot of cardiovascular problems. So when you combine like something like not like poor calcium handling, which is already a part of cardiovascular disease, and then statins, it's like you're saying, oh yeah, people with cardiovascular disease take statins, but then blaming statins for the part of cardiovascular disease, like it's they're connected. We don't have a full picture. I will say maybe there is like some like side effects that we should be more well understood about. I'm not opposed to that. Because like if the more we find out, the more we can improve upon the medications we have and make statins better. Because like at the end of the day, if we can make something completely side effect free, that should be our goal. But it unfortunately can't always happen
Yeah,
because
I
like
don't think that ever happens hardly,
I
right?
don't think that can even happen. So the thing is that if something works, it's going to have a side effect. But is that side effect worth it? And if that side effect is worth it, then we should probably keep using it. And based off of the years upon years and meta-analytical data showing the beneficial effects of statins, I would say that it is beneficial and generally is good. Of course, there's probably some people who are like they don't have a good effect on.
So what is next on your agenda? What are you trying to do? Are you going to be like releasing some new revenue streams? Are you coming out with are you doing any programming, any courses? You're going to start building up your YouTube? What do you think you're going to be doing? Just focus on the stuff you've been doing?
So I'm probably going to be building up my YouTube very soon. So I'm going to be
Very different, huh?
yeah. I'm going to be grinding pretty hard on YouTube. I have a friend of mine in my training group who's going to be helping me edit videos. I'm going to be starting off with some basic stuff, so like talking about like biology, stuff like that. Um, and then I was going to address some of the videos of people have made on me, like maybe like I'll address Jeffrey's. Um, other than that, like being able to like reach out to people and like have podcasts like this and sit downs. I'd love to have more discussions like this. I feel like they're very helpful just so people understand what I'm trying to say. Oh, I feel like a lot of people, it like, I'm sure you've even seen it. Like a lot of people, it just kind of goes over some people's heads because
Yeah.
it's like a 90-second video. So.
Yeah. Well, you're one of the people who will probably do pretty good across all platforms. There are some kinds of content that are like won't work like on YouTube. Like my buddy, my best friend, he's huge on TikTok, tried to go to YouTube and it didn't translate with the way he does. And I've got another buddy, he's huge on Instagram, but didn't translate to TikTok or YouTube. You've got kind of content that'll be really good long form too. And you're kind of like RP in the sense that you like appeal to really novice people and then to pretty advanced as well. So you got that whole spectrum. So yeah, I think your YouTube will probably start blowing up pretty soon as you start putting a little bit of effort into that.
Yeah, I really do hope so because I enjoy making long form content. I made a few videos so far, a few on like just basic stuff, and I hope I can go more in depth.
Nice. Yeah, I think it would be awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to cover before I let you go? I know you've been just doing tons of shit this week. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Oh no, thank you so much for having me on. And nah, I think I covered pretty much everything, and I just said nah as so casually. Um,
Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome, and I'm excited to see what you do because I know you're just going to keep blowing up 40,000 like in 2 weeks. I'm lucky I caught you. Now you're going to be too busy for me next month.
oh no, 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 no. That I would love to come back on, and thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. This is really fun. Thank you so much, on.
Have a good day.
All
Bye.
right, take it easy.